Welcome to the Knowledge Base in Educational Administration. This session is going to focus on developing an historical overview of the field. Given your reading assignments for the last several weeks, I thought you'd appreciate Edward Munch's Primal Scream, as it depicts an individual being disconnected from reality. I realize that the readings are complex, but they're really well developed and are seminal works in our field. Today I'd like to discuss the development of the knowledge base in educational administration. Although it's useful to depict its emergence as distinct eras, Culbertson and Dornmoyer and others frequently intertwine related themes and issues as they discuss the evolution of the field. I'll try to unpack the major themes and issues across these 6 eras to help organize our thinking about how the field developed. Although these discussions tend to be complex, the relationship among these themes and issues is highly relevant to understanding educational administration as a field of study. One of the most important things we'll discuss this semester is the notion of theoretical pluralism. Within the social sciences, major schools of thought have emerged, each with its own view of organizations and leadership. Each school of thought is typically associated with a period in time. However, theories go through cycles of ascendance, dominance, challenged by other theories, and decline in importance as circumstances change. An inherent problem of studying theories along a timeline is that people often assume that concepts developed during preceding eras lose relevance. Theories don't die as new ones are added to the knowledge base. Rather, we have parallel strands of theories or frames, and research traditions continue over time. For example, Frederick Taylor's notion of scientific management developed in the 1920s, and Weber's idea of the ideal bureaucracy are still highly relevant today in terms of our understanding and analysis of organizations. The formative era, 1875 to 1900, was described as an era developing a science of education and management. Harold Payne and William Harris, superintendents and teacher scholars, sought to develop a science of educational administration by gathering and analyzing data, generalizing findings, and developing laws or theories that could be used to guide and improve practice. There was a tension between positivists and social sciences in this era. The tension between positivists and social sciences was evident. Positivists were empiricists influenced by the work of Comte and Spencer, and professors who graduated from German universities attempted to banish anything unknowable from the sciences and create the one best way to do research. Those grounded in social and philosophical sciences, like Payne and Harris, viewed the boundaries of education as expansive and required the inductive and deductive research methods. However, those grounded in the social and philosophical sciences, including Payne and Harris, viewed the boundaries of education as expansive and required inductive and deductive research methods to understand the problems of practice. They proposed borrowing concepts from other fields, including history, sociology, and political science, to frame their studies. 2 conflicting schools of thought emerged. The German tradition of positivist scholarship emphasized research was an end unto itself. In other words, pure academic research. The other was uniquely American belief that research should have practical applications that improve society. An idea advanced by Benjamin Franklin and evidenced by the Wisconsin idea, which researchers analyzed the butterfly content of milk to enable farmers to get a consistently fair price for their product. This was an era characterized by foment and debate. Positivist research displaced philosophical and social science orientations as the dominant way of knowing. It was also recognized as a theory-building era in which great value was placed on having a background in the classics, good moral character, knowledge of content, and teaching. The next era I want to discuss is the science of school management. which is roughly 1901 to 1925. This era reflects the rise of positivism and is rooted in the industrial world. At the time, it was described as the new revolutionary spirit. Positivist perspectives characterized by the Vienna School had a profound impact on research in the behavioral sciences, including psychology and sociology. They were widely accepted and emerged as the dominant model for doing research in the United States. Although some scientists viewed research as an end unto itself, others saw it as a vehicle for increasing industrial productivity and managerial efficiency. However, most universities were dominated by the arts and sciences faculty, and they neither saw the need for preparing teachers nor for conducting research on school practice. Notwithstanding, early researchers including Rice and Hill and Buckingham broke with positivists, arguing that research findings should be used to improve practice, and advocated for establishing university-based professional preparation programs. George Strayer and Elwood Cubley also emphasized the need to use data to improve practice, and they called for creating educational administration programs. In this regard, positivist dominance of research was being challenged. As noted previously, research was embraced by industry and corporate management. Consequently, their perspectives were adopted by educators who were expected to act as CEOs of schools and school districts. Concepts associated with scientific management, particularly those of Frederick Taylor, Henry Fayol, Max Weber, and Luther Gulick, were very influential in shaping how we do administration. Let's take a brief look at the professional preparation of our field. In 1889, Columbia University Teachers College was created to respond to the need for more teachers and principals. Dean James Russell established a new program in school management, and two of its graduates, George Strayer and Elwood Cubley, founded educational administration as a university-based field of study in 1922. They sought to describe normative principles that would improve school administration practices. Interestingly enough, the University of Kentucky Department of Educational Administration was founded a year later in 1923. Let's take a brief look at the expansion of educational management science between 1926 and 1950. Although we recognize that this era was dominated by business and positivist science, it was also profoundly influenced by events including an unprecedented expansion of the American economy, the Great Depression, and World War II. Although positivists were being challenged on many fronts, they remained steadfast. However, during the late 1920s, John Dewey, a positivist and pragmatist, challenged them in persuasively arguing that perspectives drawn from many disciplines and multiple methods were needed to understand human experience. He believed that reliable research methods were needed to study human behavior, organizations, and public policy. John Dewey presented persuasive arguments about the realities of schools and problems of practice. As a positivist, he believed that problems of practice should define research questions and that findings should be used to improve schooling. Strayer, Cubley, and Payne embraced the notion that researchers and practitioners needed to collaborate to understand problems of practice and improve education. The paradigm wars continued, but bridges were being built between education and the social sciences. Ideas and methods associated with sociology and anthropology linked schools, education, and culture, and contributed to building education administration as a field of study. Concepts from economics, politics, and political science were used to understand public policy, democratic systems, and school finance. Human relations researchers, including Roethlisberger and Dixon, contributed to developing notions of democratic school administration. These connections expanded research methods used to study problems of practice and enhanced interpretations of findings to solve problems. Human resource theorists, including McGregor, Theory X and Theory Y, Roethlisberger, Hawthorne studies democratic leadership and group dynamics, Maslow, motivation, Blake and Mouton, leadership styles, Hersey and Blanchard, situational leadership, helped to define leadership and management in industry, corporations, and in education. Here's a snapshot of how school administrators were prepared during the era. For the most part, these programs focused on practical, immediate, and mechanical aspects of administration to assist students in understanding the nature of administration and prepare them to perform successfully in their roles. Little attention was given to the theoretical and conceptual underpinnings of school administrators' work. Course content was little more than facts, war stories, and prescriptions offered by experienced practitioners. During this period, coalitions of practitioner associations, professors, and state agency personnel, referred to as the Iron Triangle, defined and standardized the content of educational administration programs and influenced state legislation for administrative licensure. By the end of World War II, there were approximately 125 institutions that had administrative preparation programs. Interestingly enough, our department awarded the first doctorate in 1938. Faculty were mostly superintendents who had heavy teaching loads and showed little inclination to do research. Students aspiring to administrative positions were predominantly white males, holding full-time positions as school administrators while attending school on a part-time basis. Few trained for the professorate. The era of administrative sciences, roughly 1951 to 1966, introduced significant changes to the field. During the post-World War II period, science was revered and positivism was viewed as the one best way to do research in the United States. Consequently, positivists launched a quest for the science of school administration. The cooperative program in educational administration formed by prominent research universities brought leading scholars together to study educational administration. This group launched what has become known as the theory movement. They emphasized the use of positivist research methods in the social sciences, and at this juncture, research and practice were effectively separated. This group of positivists, the Vienna School, continued to have a profound influence on research in psychology and sociology. 6 ideas defined the research theory movement. First, behavior looked at what people did, not what they should do. Theories describe, explain, and predict, but never prescribe. Effective research starts with theory and is guided by theory, not problems of practice. Social sciences and theory dominated the preparation of educational administrators. And lastly, administration was viewed as a general phenomenon. It was found in all organizations, and thus all theories apply equally to all organizations and in all contexts. During this era, precisely defined concepts of science accentuated the dominance of positivist research. Once again, the focus shifted from qualitative to quantitative methods, and from practice-based ideas to theory-based concepts. These shifts separated the university-based administration programs from the field of practice. Bates and Greenfield, prominent critical theorists, criticized logical positivism as the only way of knowing. Theory movement scholars, including Simon, Human Behavior in Organizations, Getzels and Guba, including roles at the institutional and individual level, Griffiths, Human Behavior, Halpin, the Ohio Leadership Studies, March, Organizations, profoundly influenced organizational management and leadership. In addition, the theory movement altered university-based education administration programs. They emphasized learning social science-based theories to the near exclusion of problems of practice. Professors with backgrounds in the social sciences, including history, psychology, anthropology, and sociology, were sought after rather than practitioners who had knowledge about school administration. Consequently, educational administration courses and programs became discipline-based rather than practitioner-oriented. Let's talk about the challenges to administrative sciences between 1967 and 1985. Brown versus Board of Education was a wake-up call that all was not right in public education and American society. It underscored that both people and context mattered. It also heightened attention to the role of research in solving pressing problems of schools and society. For example, the Coleman Report, 1972, documented conditions, supported problem analysis, and proposed corrective action. This new awareness supported civil rights and feminist movements, the Great Society, the War on Poverty, and equal rights movement. Social science researchers and critical theorists argued persuasively that understanding human behavior in organizations and society was complex, and that logical positivist methods were not well suited to this work. Many researchers understood the complexity of these issues and that it required multiple ways of knowing. And the magnitude of problems required immediate and informed action. During this era, logical positivism was viewed as being too rigid and too far removed from the reality of practice to be useful. Thus, post-positivists argued that new ways of knowing were needed, and that the field of educational administration should move towards pluralism. Consequently, the field created a big tent to accommodate broad research perspectives. Dan Griffiths commented that the field of educational administration was in a state of intellectual turmoil. He believed that positivist research questions originated in the disciplines and findings fed back into the disciplines to build theory. On the other hand, he recognized that policy researchers, like the Coleman Report, argued that action research originates in the problems of practice and feeds back into corrective action. There is little doubt that educational administration is a contested field. Critical theorists, including Greenfield, Bates, and Foster, criticized educational administration research for being disconnected from the realities of practice. They argued that positivist research was too rigid, and new ways of knowing, including qualitative, phenomenological, and critical theorists' perspectives, were needed to not only understand important issues, but also to solve important problems. As researchers incorporated social science concepts, new lines of inquiry were developed that advanced the study of macro and micro politics, power, organizational culture and climate, symbolism, critical race theory, and feminist theories. Between 1946 and 1987, the number of university-based educational administration increased from 125 to over 500. Practitioners were disenchanted with university educational administration programs that were theory-based. Halpin notes that theoretical models were too disconnected from reality of practice to be useful. The medical model was used as an example of how to correct the problem. Advocates called for research to be done in the context of healing, in other words, improving practice, much like Dewey talked about in the 1920s and the 1930s. National Commission and Task Force reports between 1986 and the present note that recent changes in the nature and direction of school reform require that administrative preparation be realigned to fit the new circumstances. When we look at the continuing quest for the knowledge base in educational administration between 1976 and the present, there is little doubt that the emergence of a global economy threatened the well-being of the nation and inextricably linked education and the economy. The educational reform movement shifted the nation's focus from access to excellence and underscored the compelling need to be inclusive, emphasizing that all children can learn at high levels. There was widespread agreement that global competition and national economic survival depended on educational excellence. Since the mid-1970s, the Big Tent gave critical theorists like Foster, Bates, Greenfield, Appel, Giroux, and Eisner a platform from which they called for repositioning research in the field of educational administration. They believed that knowledge was political, in that those in power, the positivists, defined what knowledge was legitimate. They also claimed that a science of human behavior is not possible, as knowledge is not objective but culturally constructed through social relationships. Thus, meanings were never static because they were constantly reconstructed through human interaction. In other words, action was constructed, not caused. Although these ideas were widely accepted by scholars in the social sciences, particularly in sociology with Bloomer, cultural anthropology with Geertz, organizations with Schoen, history of science, Kuhn, not everyone in the Big Tent agreed. At this juncture, critics argued that the purpose of research depended on your discipline and your stance on research. Positivists believe that research is of value unto itself. On the other hand, Dewey's ideas for grounding research in practice and improving education resonated with many. For example, feminist and critical race theory in exploring issues of voice and social justice have an opportunity to impact future generations. In some, the paradigm wars continue, even though we have accepted the notion of theoretical pluralism. Most agree that alternative research methods and views have enriched the field without displacing others. As a consequence, we share a richer and deeper knowledge base. Notwithstanding these advances, critical theorists complained that the Big Tent was tokenism and pushed for being on center stage. It was evident that accommodation and compromise was not part of their agenda. Most agree that a knowledge base in educational administration is essential to the field of study. It was defined by the National Policy Board for Educational Administration in its premise series and encompasses 7 major categories, including societal and cultural, teaching and learning, organizational theory, research methods, both quantitative and qualitative, leadership, policy and politics, as well as the moral and ethical dimensions of schooling. These 7 categories are found in every educational leadership program in the United States. We have discussed the evolution of the knowledge base using historical eras. It may be useful for you to create brief narratives for each of the 6 major themes. I've provided some brief notes in the PowerPoint to begin your work. In closing, I would like to pose several questions and tasks associated with acquiring knowledge, applying it, and using what you know to solve problems. First, let's do a quick review. Compare and contrast the strengths and weaknesses of positivism and post-positivism. Then, I'd like to talk about application. How would you describe the purpose of your own research? Finally, how would you use what you know to solve problems? When planning your study, how would you go about identifying a research question that would address a real problem of practice? How would you go about identifying a research question that would address a gap in the knowledge base? In closing, your understanding of the evolution of the knowledge base, as well as the themes and issues, will help you in defining and carrying out your research study.